innocent, and Laura had lied to him. Michael's resolve. The following days were a blur for Michael. He felt like he was moving through fog, trapped in a daze of disbelief, anger, and deep, searing pain. He barely slept, his mind racing with questions. How long had this been going on? Was it just this one time? What else was she hiding? Determined to find out more, Michael decided he needed to act. He couldn't live in this limbo of doubt and suspicion any longer. Quietly, he began to plan his exit. He moved through his days on autopilot, going to work, coming home, but his mind was elsewhere, focusing on how to protect his children, how to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. Another man's story. Around the same time, Michael heard whispers in town about a man named John, a dispatcher for truck drivers. John's story seemed to echo Michael's pain. He had suspected his own wife of cheating with his colleague. To confirm his suspicions, John had installed a GPS tracker in her car. When he saw her meeting his colleague at a hotel, his worst fears were realized. John's world had shattered, just like Michael's. They were both men blindsided by betrayal, struggling to make sense of their new reality, trying to find a way forward in the midst of their private hells. Michael sat in his car one night, hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He realized he had to make a decision: confront Laura now, demand answers, or gather more evidence and plan his exit carefully. He knew one thing for sure: his life would never be the same again. Michael woke up the next morning with a familiar dull ache in his chest. Sleep had eluded him again, leaving him with hours of restless thoughts circling like vultures. He dressed quietly, careful not to wake Laura. She lay beside him, sleeping soundly, as if nothing had changed. He envied her calm, the way she seemed to carry on as if everything were normal. He stepped out of the house, the morning air cool against his skin. As he drove to work, his mind wasn't on the road, but on the growing list of questions he had about Laura. Every word she had spoken since her confession now seemed coated with a layer of deception. The conversation with the stranger in the store replayed in his mind, each time triggering a fresh wave of anger. She lied, and she had been careless enough to let him know it. At the office, Michael tried to bury himself in work, hoping the distraction would quiet his thoughts, but every time his phone buzzed or an email popped up, he felt a jolt of anxiety. He wondered if she was texting him now, or if she was messaging that man again. His focus slipped, and he found himself typing the same sentence over and over, like a man stuck in a loop he couldn't escape. During lunch, he stared at his phone for a long moment, thumb hovering over Tanya's number. What exactly did he want from her? Answers, maybe. The truth that Laura wasn't willing to give. His breath caught as he pressed the call button. "Michael?" Tanya's voice came through the line, surprised. "Yeah, it's me," he said, trying to keep his tone steady. "I need to talk to you about something. It's important." There was a brief pause, then she replied, "Okay, sure. Is everything all right?" "No," Michael said bluntly. "No, it's not. Can we meet? I'd rather do this in person." Okay," Tanya replied, sounding hesitant. "How about the cafe near the park, in an hour?" "Fine," Michael agreed, hanging up. As he sat waiting at the cafe, his mind raced with possibilities. Maybe Tanya would confirm his worst fears, or perhaps she'd downplay everything, try to convince him it was all a misunderstanding. He had no idea what to expect. When Tanya arrived, she looked wary, her eyes scanning his face for clues as to what he might know. Michael didn't bother with pleasantries. He leaned in, his voice low and tense. "Laura told me about the date you set her up on," he began, watching for her reaction. "She said nothing happened, but I ran into the guy. He made it sound like there was more to it. So I need you to be honest with me, Tanya. What really happened?" Tanya's eyes flicked around the room, and she shifted uncomfortably in her seat, glancing down at her coffee. Michael, I didn't think she'd actually go, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. It was just a silly suggestion. I thought she'd laugh it off, but she seemed curious. Michael's jaw tightened. Curious? About what exactly? Tanya sighed, her hand trembling slightly as she stirred her coffee. About what it would feel like to, I don't know, feel wanted again. To see if she still had it, you know? She said she felt like you were distant, like you weren't really seeing her anymore. I think she just wanted some attention, something different. Michael's heart sank, but he pressed on. And this guy, what's his story? He's just someone I knew, Tanya admitted, her eyes not meeting his. We dated for a bit. Nothing serious. I thought he might be a fun distraction for her, that's all. But I swear I didn't think it would turn into anything. I never meant to cause any trouble, Michael, I promise. Michael's face darkened. He felt his pulse quicken. A fun distraction? He repeated, incredulous. You thought throwing my wife into another man's arms was a fun distraction? Tanya winced, clearly flustered. I didn't think she'd actually go through with it, she insisted, her voice barely above a whisper. She told me later she regretted it, that it was a mistake. Michael leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. A mistake? He echoed, bitterness seeping into his tone. A mistake that's costing me my marriage? Tanya looked genuinely remorseful, but Michael felt no sympathy. He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I can't do this, he muttered, turning to leave. Tanya called his name, but he ignored her, his thoughts already racing ahead to his next step. A confrontation at home. When Michael returned home that evening, Laura was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. She looked up as he entered, her smile hesitant. Hey, she greeted, her voice overly cheerful. How was your day? Michael didn't answer. Instead, he set his bag down on the table and fixed her with a hard stare. I ran into Tanya today, he said quietly. Laura froze, her hand tightening on the spoon. Oh? What did she say? He kept his gaze on her, searching for any sign of guilt. She told me about your date and how you were curious to see if you still had it. Laura's face flushed and she looked away, her voice defensive. I told you, Michael, it was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to go anywhere. He shook his head, feeling the anger boiling in his chest. Why didn't you tell me everything from the beginning? Why lie to me, Laura? Her eyes flashed, defensive. I didn't lie, she shot back. I told you about the date. I didn't have to, but I did. I didn't do anything wrong, Michael. Then why did that guy look at me like he knew something I didn't? Michael demanded. Why did he make it sound like there was more to the story? Laura opened her mouth, then closed it, her expression faltering. I don't know, she stammered. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was lonely, Michael. You're always working, always tired. I just wanted to feel something again. Michael felt a sharp sting in his chest. And you think that excuses what you did? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Laura's shoulders slumped. No, she said quietly. No, it doesn't. But you have to understand. I felt like I was disappearing, like you didn't see me anymore. Michael turned away, gripping the edge of the counter. He couldn't bear to look at her, couldn't stand the sight of her standing there, justifying her betrayal. I need some air, he muttered, walking out of the kitchen, out of the house. The meeting with John. The cool night air hit him as he stepped outside. He walked aimlessly down the street, his mind spinning with anger, confusion, and hurt. How had it come to this? How had their marriage fallen apart without him noticing? He found himself at a local bar. He pushed open the door, the dim light and soft hum of conversation, a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. He sat at the bar and ordered a drink, feeling the burn of whiskey slide down his throat. He caught his reflection in the mirror behind the bar, eyes hollow, face drawn tight with stress. A man on the edge of something he couldn't quite define. "Michael, what are you doing here?" a voice asked from behind him. He turned to see John, the truck dispatcher, sitting a few stools down, a glass of beer in his hand. John looked just as ragged as Michael felt. Michael blinked, surprised. "John, I didn't expect to see you here." John gave a wry smile. "I didn't expect to be here either, but life has a funny way of screwing you over, doesn't it?" Michael nodded, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Yeah, it does." John motioned to the empty stool beside him. "Come on, sit down. Misery loves company, right?" Michael sat down, and for a moment the two men were silent, lost in their own thoughts. Finally, John spoke again. "I heard about Laura," he said softly. "I'm sorry, man. I've been through something similar. It's hell." Michael glanced at him. "Yeah, I heard about what happened with your wife. You're still planning to go through with the divorce?" John nodded, his eyes distant. "I am. It's hard, though. Every day feels like a battle, but I can't live like this. Not knowing, not trusting. It's eating me alive." Michael stared into his glass, his thoughts swirling. "I'm starting to think the same," he admitted. I don't know how to do it. How to face it." John gave him a sympathetic look. "You take it one step at a time, and you prepare yourself for the fight of your life." Michael nodded slowly, feeling the weight of John's words settle over him. One step at a time. He could do that. He had to. Michael didn't sleep that night. After leaving the bar, he drove around town, his mind whirling with thoughts, fears, and half-formed plans. John's words echoed in his head. One step at a time. Prepare yourself for the fight of your life. He knew that to confront Laura, he needed more than just suspicions and stray words from a stranger. He needed concrete evidence, something that would strip away any lies and expose the truth, whatever it might be. He knew he had no other choice. He could no longer live in this lie, in constant expectation of another blow. His heart sank when he realized that the only way to find out the truth was to act. It was now or never. He decided to start with her phone. It was the most obvious place to look, but also the most difficult. Laura was careful, always keeping it close, locking the screen whenever she was done. Michael had noticed she had changed her passcode recently, a small detail that, in hindsight, seemed like a glaring red flag. He waited, biding his time, observing her patterns. Late one night, after Laura had gone to bed, he carefully slipped into the room. She was asleep, the soft sound of her breathing filling the silence. Her phone lay on the nightstand, its screen dark. Michael felt his heart pound in his chest as he reached for it, his fingers trembling slightly. He had been married to this woman for 19 years, shared a bed, a life, a family with her. But now this small device seemed like a chasm between them, filled with secrets he feared to uncover. He picked up the phone, holding his breath. He needed to unlock it, but he had no idea what the new passcode could be. He hesitated, then looked at Laura's sleeping form. Carefully, he lifted her hand, pressing her thumb against the fingerprint sensor. The screen flickered to life. His heart raced. He was in. Michael moved quickly, scrolling through her messages. Nothing unusual in the main conversation threads. But then he remembered. She'd always been good at hiding things in plain sight. He checked the hidden folder, and his blood ran cold. There, buried under seemingly innocuous messages, was a string of conversations with the man from the store, the man she had been on a date with. He read through the texts, his breath catching in his throat. They were casual at first, a few jokes, some light flirting, but then they became more intimate, more revealing. "I had a great time the other night. one of the messages read. Wish I could have stayed longer, another said. Can't stop thinking about you. When can we meet again? Michael felt his hands shaking as he scrolled further. The messages grew bolder, more suggestive. She had lied to him, flat out lied, and here was the proof he needed. He quickly took screenshots, sending them to his own phone. Then he placed her phone back on the nightstand and left the room quietly, feeling the weight of betrayal settle in his chest like a stone. Gathering evidence. The next morning, Michael woke up determined. He wasn't going to confront her just yet. He needed more. He needed to be sure. He started checking her social media, her emails, looking for anything that seemed out of place. Each clue he found only added fuel to the fire burning inside him. He decided to call in a favor from his old friend Dave, a tech-savvy guy who had helped him out with various computer issues over the years. Dave was discreet, loyal, and he owed Michael a few favors. Hey Dave, Michael said when he picked up the phone. I need your help with something delicate. Sure, Mike, anything, Dave replied. What's going on? Michael hesitated, then took a deep breath. I think Laura's cheating on me. I need to know for sure. Can you help me access some of her accounts? See if there's anything there? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Damn, man. I'm sorry to hear that. But yeah, I can help. Send me whatever details you have, and I'll see what I can do. Over the next few days, Dave worked quietly in the background, digging through digital trails, following up on leads. He gave Michael updates in hushed tones, telling him how he accessed old chats, recovered deleted emails, and traced conversations back months. I used old contacts to get access to her accounts, Dave explained. I found deleted emails and chats. At first it didn't seem like much, but then, these hotels, these bills. Mike, I'm really sorry. She's been talking to this guy for months, Dave told him over the phone. There are emails going back almost a year. Seems like they started out just chatting, but it got more serious over time. Michael's hand tightened around his phone. Can you see if they've met up more than once? Already on it, Dave replied. I found a few hotel receipts, different names, but the same billing address. Your home address. I'm sorry, Mike. It doesn't look good. And wet. But he knew he had to move forward. For the first time in his life, he felt so lost and determined at the same time. This is it, he told himself. This is where everything changes. Michael's hands were clammy as he rode the elevator up to the second floor, his pulse thundering in his ears. He felt a swirl of emotions, anger, betrayal, fear, and a strange, cold clarity that came with knowing he was moments away from a confrontation that would change everything. As the elevator dinged and the doors opened, he took a deep breath and stepped out into the hallway. Inside the hotel room 214, the number seemed to glow in his mind, a beacon drawing him closer to the truth. He walked slowly, deliberately, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. His breath quickened, and his heart felt like it was pounding in his throat. He reached the door and pressed his ear against the wood, listening. Muffled voices, a soft laugh, Laura's laugh. His stomach twisted, bile rising in his throat. How could she laugh like that, here with him? He took a step back, raising his hand to knock, then stopped himself. Number not yet, he needed to be sure. He glanced around, spotted a housekeeping cart left unattended a few doors down. He grabbed a towel from it and stood at the door of room 214, breathing deeply to calm himself. He knocked, 3 sharp raps that echoed in the quiet hall. He heard the rustle of movement inside, then a male voice called out, "Who is it?" Michael's voice was steady, calm. "Room service," he said, masking the tremor he felt inside. There was a pause, and then the door cracked open, the chain still on. Michael could see the man's face through the gap. The same smug grin from the store, now tinged with confusion. "What the hell?" Michael didn't give him time to react. He shoved the door hard, snapping the chain and pushing the man back. He stepped inside, his eyes immediately locking on Laura, who was sitting on the bed, her eyes wide with shock. She looked up, the color draining from her face. "Michael, what are you doing here?" She stammered, scrambling to stand up, her voice tinged with panic. Michael's gaze moved from Laura to the man, who was now glaring at him, clearly caught off guard. "I could ask you the same thing," Michael said coldly, his voice low and hard. "But I think I already know the answer." Laura's mouth opened, but no words came out. The man, emboldened by her silence, stepped forward. "Look, man, I don't know what you think is going on here, but—" Michael cut him off with a sharp look. "Don't insult my intelligence. I know exactly what's going on. I've seen the messages, the hotel bills. I know everything." Laura's face crumpled, her hands shaking as she reached out, as if to steady herself. "Michael, please, let me explain." Michael felt a surge of anger explode in his chest, a white-hot fury that made his hands tremble. How dare she ask to explain, after everything? "Explain? Explain what, Laura?" he shouted, his voice rising. "Explain how you've been sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face for months? What is there to explain?" The man stepped forward again, trying to assert himself. "Listen, this isn't how it looks." Michael turned on him, his eyes blazing. "Shut up. This is between me and my wife. You're nothing but a piece of garbage she picked up along the way." The man's face flushed with anger, but he didn't say anything more. He knew better than to push Michael further. Laura, her eyes brimming with tears, reached out again. "Michael, I never meant for it to go this far. I was lonely. I was lost." Michael felt his heart twist painfully at her words. Lonely? Lost? So you thought the answer was to crawl into bed with another man? To betray everything we've built together? Laura sobbed, her voice breaking. "You've been so distant, Michael. You're never home, always working. I felt like I didn't matter to you anymore, like I was invisible." Michael laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and hollow. "So this is my fault? I work my ass off to provide for you and the kids, and you repay me by cheating on me? Do you have any idea what you've done?" Laura took a step toward him, her hands trembling. "I know I've hurt you, Michael. I know I've broken your trust, but I never wanted to end things like this. I'm so sorry." Michael felt his resolve falter for a moment, the pain in her voice cutting through his anger like a knife. He had loved her once, loved her so deeply that it felt like a part of his soul had been carved out now, but he couldn't let that sway him. He couldn't let her see the cracks in his armor. How could she ask for forgiveness so easily? "You're sorry?" he repeated, his voice cold. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Laura. Sorry doesn't change what you did, the lies you told, the nights you spent with him while I was home with our kids, wondering what went wrong." The man, sensing an opportunity, tried to interject again. "Look, maybe we should just—" Michael snapped his head back toward him. "Get out!" he said through clenched teeth. "Get out of here before I do something I'll regret." The man looked at Laura, who gave him a small, desperate nod. He grabbed his coat from the chair and quickly made his way to the door, casting one last defiant glance at Michael before disappearing down the hallway. Only two remain. Now, it was just the two of them, standing in the middle of the room, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. Laura reached out again, but Michael stepped back, his eyes never leaving hers. "Why, Laura?" he asked softly, almost a whisper. "Why did you do this to us?" Laura's shoulders shook as she began to cry, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know, Michael, I don't know. I was unhappy, I was scared. I felt like we were drifting apart, like we were just roommates. I didn't know how to reach you anymore." Michael closed his eyes, feeling the sting of her words. He had felt the distance, too, the growing divide between them, but he had never imagined it would come to this. He opened his eyes, his voice firm. "You should have talked to me, Laura. You should have tried to fix things with me, not with some stranger." Laura nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know, Michael. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." Michael's voice was a raw whisper. "But you did." They stood there, silence stretching between them like an open wound. Finally, Michael took a deep breath, his decision made. This is the end. The end of everything they had built, everything they had shared. There was no going back. "This is over, Laura. Our marriage, it's over. I can't do this anymore. I won't." Laura gasped, her face crumpling. "No, Michael, please, we can work through this. We can get help. I'll do anything." Michael shook his head, his expression resolute. "No, Laura. You made your choice. You threw everything we had away. I'm done." He turned to leave, but then paused, glancing back at her one last time. "I'll be moving out. I'll come by for my things tomorrow, and I'll call my lawyer. We'll figure out the details." Laura sobbed harder, collapsing onto the bed, her cries filling the room. Michael felt a pang of grief, a sharp pain in his chest as he turned and walked out of the room, out of the hotel, into the cold night air. The aftermath. He walked back to his car, his body numb, his mind buzzing with 1,000 thoughts. I did it. It's over. He had confronted her, seen the truth with his own eyes, made his decision. But he didn't feel the relief he had hoped for. Instead, he felt empty, like a hollow shell of the man he once was. How did it come to this? He thought, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Was this really the only way? He sat in his car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, trying to steady his breathing. He had known this would be hard, but he hadn't realized just how much it would hurt. He felt like he had lost not just his wife, but a part of himself. A part he could never get back. His phone buzzed. It was a text from John. "How did it go?" Michael stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "It's done. It's over." John's reply came quickly. "I'm sorry, man. I'm here if you need to talk." Michael nodded to himself, feeling a small measure of comfort in John's words. He had lost so much tonight, but maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to move forward. One step at a time. On the way home. He put the car in drive and headed home, knowing there was a long road ahead, but feeling, for the first time in a long while, that he was ready to face it. The reality of his decision settled over him like a heavy cloak, yet there was a strange sense of lightness too. I am free. Free from the lies, from the deceit. But he also knew that freedom came at a price. He thought of his children, of how he would explain this to them, how their lives would change forever. He pictured their faces, Emily's innocence, Daniel's quiet strength. How do I tell them? How do I make them understand? The questions weighed on him like lead, but he knew there was no avoiding it. He knew he needed a plan for the future. He would tell the kids the truth, but gently. He would find a new place to live, create a new routine. Slowly, step by step, he would rebuild. Rebuild from the ground up, he thought, gripping the wheel tighter. There's no other way. And for the first time since he had seen those damning texts on her phone, he felt a flicker of hope. Michael woke the next morning with the same heaviness that had settled into his chest the night before. The confrontation was done, the words spoken, but instead of feeling closure, he felt only emptiness. He moved through his morning routine like a man in a daze, brushing his teeth, shaving, getting dressed. Each step felt mechanical, routine, devoid of purpose. Is this what my life has come to? He thought. 19 years, and now I'm packing up what's left of it into a suitcase. He had promised himself he would go to the house to get his things, but he wasn't ready to face Laura again, not yet. Instead, he drove to a small park nearby, where he and Laura had taken the kids so many times when they were younger. He parked the car and sat there, staring out at the empty swings swaying in the breeze. I used to push them on those swings, he remembered, back when things were simpler, happier, before everything got so complicated. He could still hear Laura's sobs in his head, the way she had broken down in that hotel room, pleading with him to stay, to give them another chance. But he couldn't. Not after everything he had seen, everything he knew now. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into a dark abyss. He was scared of what lay at the bottom, but one thing was clear. He couldn't go back. After a long while, he turned the car around and drove to the house. He parked outside, taking a deep breath before stepping out. The house looked the same as it always did, but today it felt different. Smaller somehow. More distant. He let himself in with his key, stepping into the living room. It was quiet, the kind of eerie silence that fills a house where a storm has just passed. Laura was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up as he entered, her face a mix of hope and despair. "You came," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Michael nodded, his expression guarded. "I said I would." Laura stood up, wringing her hands nervously. "Michael, please, can we just talk?" He shook his head slowly. "There's nothing left to say, Laura. I'm here to get my things. I'll be gone in a few hours." She looked like she wanted to argue, to plead, but she simply nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. Okay. Michael moved past her, heading to their bedroom, now just a room in a house he once called home. He grabbed a suitcase from the closet and started packing his clothes, his hands moving methodically as he filled the bag with shirts, pants, socks, a life's worth of belongings, reduced to a few pieces of luggage. As he packed, he noticed a framed photo on the dresser, a picture of him and Laura on their wedding day. They looked so happy, so full of promise. He picked it up, staring at it for a long moment, his heart aching with a mix of love, regret, and deep, profound loss. He set it back down, face down, and continued packing. Was it all just a lie, he wondered? All those years, all those moments? Did any of it mean anything to her? Once he was done, he took a deep breath and walked back to the living room, where Laura still stood, watching him with those same pleading eyes. "Michael," she said softly, "what about the kids? What are we going to tell them?" He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "We tell them the truth, Laura, that we're separating, that it's not their fault, and that we both still love them very much. They deserve honesty, at least." Laura nodded, her shoulders slumping. "I'm so sorry, Michael, for everything." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not the woman who had betrayed him, but the woman he had loved for nearly 2 decades, the woman who had given him 2 beautiful children, who had laughed with him, cried with him, shared a life with him. He felt a sudden surge of sadness, a deep, aching sorrow that took his breath away. "I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry too." They stood there for a moment, the weight of their shared history hanging heavy between them. Then Michael picked up his bags and turned to leave. "Where will you go?" Laura asked, her voice small. "I don't know yet," he replied. "But I'll figure it out. One step at a time." He walked out of the house, feeling the cool breeze on his face, the sun warm on his skin. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew he had to keep moving forward, even if it hurt. Starting over. Over the next few weeks, Michael settled into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, just a 1-bedroom place with barely enough room for his belongings, but it was a start. He threw himself into work, trying to find solace in the familiarity of his routine, but it wasn't enough. The silence of the apartment, the emptiness of his days without his kids around, weighed on him like a lead blanket. At night, His mind wouldn't stop racing. How do I start over at 45? He thought. Where do I even begin? He met with his lawyer, started the divorce proceedings, but each step felt like a small death, another piece of his old life being stripped away. The nights were the hardest. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts of Laura, of the life they had built together, of the betrayal that had torn it all apart. I need to do something. I need to figure out what comes next. One day, as he sat in his new, empty living room, his phone buzzed. A message from John. "Hey man, just checking in. How are you holding up?" Michael hesitated, then replied, "Taking it one day at a time." John responded quickly. "That's all you can do. Let's grab a beer soon, talk things out." Michael felt a small smile tug at his lips. "Yeah, I'd like that." He set the phone down, feeling a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a while. Hope. Maybe things would be okay. Maybe I could find a way through this, one step at a time. Meeting the kids. That weekend, he had his first meeting with his kids. He had been dreading it, unsure of how they would react, how they would feel. He sat at a park bench, watching as Emily and Daniel approached, holding Laura's hand. When they saw him, they broke free and ran to him, their faces bright with joy. "Dad!" Emily cried, throwing her arms around his neck. Daniel followed, hugging him tightly. Michael felt his heart swell with emotion. He hugged them back, holding them close. "Hey guys," he said, his voice thick with tears. "I missed you so much." They sat together on the bench, talking, laughing, trying to find their way through the awkwardness of this new reality. Michael could see the questions in their eyes, the uncertainty. Emily asked, "Are you and Mom getting a divorce?" Michael swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "Yes, sweetie. But remember, we both love you very much. This has nothing to do with you, it's just something between me and Mom." Daniel looked up, his eyes searching his father's. "Will we still see you?" Michael's throat tightened, but he managed a smile. "Of course, buddy. Whenever you want. I'm just a phone call away." He knew it would take time, but he was willing to be patient, to rebuild, to heal. As the afternoon wore on, he watched them play, their laughter filling the air, and he felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had lost so much, but he still had them. He still had his kids, his future, his strength. Looking forward. Later that night, as he sat in his apartment, Michael felt a strange sense of calm. He was far from healed, far from okay, but he knew he had taken the first steps. He had faced the truth, confronted his demons, and found the courage to walk away from a marriage that no longer served him. And in doing so, he had found something else. Himself. A man who had been hidden beneath years of routine, of responsibility, of trying to be everything to everyone else. He had lost a lot, but he had also gained something. A chance to start over, to redefine his life, to find happiness on his own terms. He picked up his phone and sent a message to John. "Thanks for everything. Let's meet up this weekend." John replied quickly. "Looking forward to it. Hang in there." Michael smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude. He would hang in there. He would move forward, one step at a time. Thinking ahead. Michael began to think about what he wanted next. What did I always want, but never had the time for? He realized he had always wanted to learn to play the guitar, to paint, to travel more with the kids. He began to form a list in his head of things he wanted to do, not just for himself, but also for them. He also considered therapy. Maybe I need to talk to someone about all this, he thought. Figure out how to make sure I never end up in this place again. He planned to find a counselor, to take things slowly, to build a new life brick by brick, thought by thought. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was ready for the challenge. He wanted to become a better man, a better father, and a better version of himself. The journey continues. Michael let out a long breath, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be hard, but he was ready to face it, ready to rebuild, ready to find a new path. Because sometimes, when everything falls apart, it's just a chance to start over. And Michael knew he was ready for that chance, ready to find out who he really was and what he really wanted, one step at a time.